Future trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Evereg's Global Insights team. And Steve, we did want to start off with another reminder just for our many, many, many YouTube subscribers to the Fresh Agenda channel that in the last week of April, our weekly take videos will be hosted on the ever.ag YouTube channel. So if you're subscribed to our Fresh Agenda channel at the moment, just hop on over to the EverAg channel, subscribe there. You'll get our new content and a lot of other great content from our colleagues if you do that.
This week,
Some market updates, a bit of a quick overview of the GD Pulse. We've got some trade and production highlights, Steve, and also, of course, chart of the week.
going around the markets, starting in the Oceania region, New Zealand markets, in particular futures, have had a good couple of weeks for SMP. Across the board, I've got to say, New Zealand market is higher. So all commodities improved in their outlook. Good couple of weeks for skim milk powder futures. Maybe it's a bit of a seasonal wind-down thing because weather conditions aren't great. We'll maybe talk about that more later. But better demand for New Zealand product. Bit of uncertainty affecting the US, obviously, and the EU less competitive given the currency shifts. And also, there was a firmer GDT last week. We'll talk about Pulse shortly.
Yeah, so across to Europe, it's completely the opposite, Steve. So S&P futures drifting weaker, and that's not news. And there's not a lot of new news around, I don't think, but probably a weaker US dollar is putting a bit more pressure on the competitiveness of EU exports. And we still got that ongoing domestic demand weakness. So, yeah, seeing weaker futures as a result. And just where that places us, well, New Zealand has lifted that premium in the short term. Again, we're kind of getting used to this kind of sideways Y formation, but certainly the US and the EU futures are pretty well aligned there, Steve. Let's talk about butter. It's a bit confusing in Europe at the moment. We took a little bit of a break for Easter, but at the moment, cream's still rising. Spot milk is also moving a bit higher at the moment. Butter was firmer, but what's going on with futures?
Yeah, they look a bit different, don't they? Probably seasonally more milk available. That's certainly coming on. And the other factor there, which is a knock-on effect of the tariff situation, is that Irish supplies are more abundant because there's a smaller US market for Irish butter, so it's looking for a home in Europe. So few conflicting stories there in that market. And a lot of, I guess, buyers sitting back, are we going down with more milk, and sellers also reluctant to come forward. So there's a lot of mixed news.
Not a lot going on in the futures as a result, I guess.
No. Staying with butterfat in Oceania, the AMF futures up. It's a while since we've seen such a movement, but it's up, as much as $200 for the $200 for the May contract. These are pretty thinly traded, but still it's available to hedge, right? There've been good GDT results at recent times for AMF. It's firming, and the European market is staying firm. So that's, that's probably a little bit of an attraction to take New Zealand butterfat rather than European product.
And it has been at a massive discount to butter for quite some time, hasn't it?
Both European, particularly New Zealand prices moved up here, so it moved further away from the US, which is pretty flat in the past week. So, not a lot changing in this outlook. Over to Pulse, Joe.
Yeah, and first of all, for whole milk powder, both powders lifted from the last Pulse result this time around, but whole milk powder regular lifted $25 a tonne compared to last week's auction number 378, I think it was. And it was 3.8% or $150 a tonne up on the previous Pulse. So, pretty good result for whole milk powder there, Steve. The gap between auction and Pulse closed for skim milk powder this time around, Steve. We've seen this kind of trend, which I think you're going to talk about in your nerdy way. But New Zealand medium heat fell 0.9% or $25 a tonne from last week's auction, but it was up 2.9% on the previous Pulse. So a little bit of a different trend there, Steve.
Yes, and in my nerdy way, the previous 5 pulses, Joe, were on average $120 a tonne lower than the preceding week. This time that difference was only $25. So could that break this trend and pull the auction higher next week? I have no idea. I mean, who does?
No.
It depends who turns up.
Mm-hmm.
We have seen some pretty strong trade, and we'll come to that. Speaking of trade.
Yeah, so just turning to China, we've got China import volume data, and it's very interesting for March. Lifted 19% on a milk solids equivalent basis for the month. Whole milk powder improved, but you can see there, Steve, in those longer periods that it hasn't been very healthy, but pretty strong in March. Skim milk powder's been flat. It's improving, and more of that in New Zealand trade data that we'll see in a little while. Whey and lactose is definitely about getting ahead of tariffs. So, shoring up supply ahead of that tariff hammer falling. And for fats, especially butter, was strong with a little bit of a retreat in the CIF price, landed price. But we'll see a little bit more of that also in the New Zealand trade data, Steve. Just while we're getting excited about March, just putting it into context, Steve, this is a rolling annual imports in milk solids equivalent terms. And you can just see that little upturn in March, but we're still well below the peaks that we've seen in Chinese trade for dairy.
Won't it be like that false start we had
Yeah.
23, where we had lockdowns finish and they came back and then it ran out?
Yeah.
Let's see.
Mm-hmm. Just looking now at butter imports, and again, this is rolling annual. Again, looking pretty healthy in the last couple of months and really higher than we've been in terms of imported butter. We'll have an update on this next week when we can add up the March exports from all exporters. But an interesting one, Steve, given how firm some of the butter pricing has been out of Europe and New Zealand.
Yeah, it shows, though, that some parts of that economy are coming back, and there is a lift in demand. And we've seen it for some time. I think bakery is a reasonably good sector in China, where other parts of the market aren't.
Mm.
And over to whey.
Yeah, just looking at dry whey imports, and that's been, obviously a big product for the US and a big bone of contention, or, one of the products directly impacted by the tariffs that we saw imposed in early April. On a rolling annual basis, though, we're just starting to, trend upwards. We've seen a little bit of an improvement in the pork market. These numbers also include some of the lower value permeate as well as dry whey. So just some interesting trends there, Steve.
New Zealand trade data came out today or overnight. Trade up 7% in milk solids equivalent terms. Whole milk powder is, the only one consistently down in whatever period you look at there. And, that is disappointing for New Zealand. It's the major export line. China has been the main reason there. China's down in this latest period and has been, consistently down over time. Southeast Asia, however, is saving whole milk powder as a category. It's up 27% in the latest data, which comes alongside both China being weaker and MENA being considerably weaker. So it's just balancing out that trade. Skim milk powder up strongly, and in the month of March, that's due to China, which is whether that's the overall market, as we just saw in your earlier chart, Joe, which is getting slightly better, but this trade is shifting to New Zealand as an origin. So
yeah, and obviously this is March data, so we'll see that turn up in import data later.
MPC trade up slightly, 3%. Fats, however, is continuing strong, as you indicated with the China data, Joe. It's up a quarter in latest data. The butter exports to China, however, the standout here in this trade, up 41% in the first quarter of 25 and 38% in the last half year. Alongside that, cheese is also quite strong, up a quarter in the last 6 months. So that's some good wins being achieved by New Zealand with some fairly aggressive marketing. Turning to some milk production data, and the US released output data overnight. US milk supply was up 0.9% in volume terms year on year, mostly due to cow numbers increasing. That was 2/3 of the increase in output, with small yield growth the second month in a row. But yield growth is a struggle right now with a greater retention of older cows as young stock are scarce. 8,000 cows were added in March versus February, so still adding cows gradually to the herd, and that's 51,000 more cows than a year ago. In amongst this, California remains a weaker state with bird flu impact still dragging the numbers. They were down 2.1% year on year in March. There was a revision in the February number, but it is gradually improving back towards par in that. Texas and Idaho, however, were the strongest regions growing. But as always, in data releases, there's a surprise.
Of course, there were revisions in those cow numbers, not by as much as we saw last month, Steve, but February numbers were 9,000 less than had been earlier reported. So, it's become a feature of the USDA cow numbers that we expect to see quite large revisions. So, and there they are for the last few reports.
Okay, Joe, chart of the week. What have you got for us?
Well, just staying with production, Steve, but this time in our part of the world, New Zealand milk solids data came out for March, and despite really tough drought conditions, it was up 0.8% in March, year on year. It was against a weak comparable. There were probably a bit more drying off the year before, which set the season up for this year, this current season. It's a pretty good result though, Steve. Strong margins are still providing an incentive for people to keep milking on. And we have seen in the PKA import data and other signs that there is still a big demand for feed. So NZX expecting that to drop off in the next couple of months as people do dry off, just to look after cow condition, because we're only a month away from the end of this current season. So they'll be preparing for the next one. And just in terms of that, Steve, we have seen some relieving rainfall over the past week for New Zealand. Those darker blue tones correspond to heavier rainfall. So that's pretty good. And in terms of soil moisture, we're still, seeing a bit of patchiness. Waikato and Taranaki still very dry at this point in time. And as we said, it doesn't really matter for this current season, but really now it's about preparing for the season ahead and making sure that cows are calving down in really good nick. So, it'll be interesting to watch what happens with production over the next couple of months, but just bearing in mind that the start of this current season was an absolute cracker. So we might see some weaker comparables this time around.
So those dry conditions are still a worry if that doesn't change much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that's all we have this week. Thanks very much for watching. We'll be coming to you from Chicago next week, so don't miss it.